The Euphrates is receding fast. The riverbed is cracking. Sinkholes and vertical tremors are being reported. And newly exposed entrances show engineered geometry, not natural erosion. That matters because Revelation links the Euphrates to a timed release event. The point isn't spectacle, it's alignment. Prepare the way for the kings from the east, Revelation 16. Something is moving in sequence, and the world isn't watching. Reports from the Euphrates show the same cluster repeating: accelerated drying, ground instability, and structures appearing where water once covered everything. These are not abstract trends. They are measurable shifts in a corridor that holds a defined position in Scripture. Genesis names it early. Revelation returns to it late. When a boundary appears at both entry and exit, movement along that line carries weight. The current claims form a sequence. Water levels fall faster than regional forecasts. Fractures run in straight segments instead of random breaks. Gas and mud release in short pulses. Sensors pick up vertical microquakes rather than lateral drift. As the riverbed lowers, openings emerge with angles, cuts, and symmetry that suggest design, not erosion. The descriptions mention sealed chambers, mixed language warnings, carved figures in positions of restraint, a hardened barrier shaped like a blade, and a pit that appears recently disturbed, with irregular sound readings recorded nearby. Each point may require confirmation. The value is in the pattern, not in defending every detail. Revelation sets a timeline around this zone. The great river Euphrates was dried up. Revelation 16. The text ties that moment to preparation. Revelation 9 speaks of the 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates. The emphasis is on appointment and release, not spectacle. If physical conditions shift in ways that mirror the order of that passage, exposure, access, weakened restraint, visible containment, then the question becomes timing, not novelty. Political actors interpret such events through strategy. Scripture frames them through sequence. Prophecy does not react to geopolitics. Geopolitics moves within the boundaries prophecy sets. That is why this analysis keeps attention on alignment. The river recedes, the ground moves, structures appear, and warnings surface. None of this settles outcomes. It signals motion. The aim is simple. Observe the progression. Compare it with the biblical template. And recognize that something may be unfolding while much of the world remains unaware. Main event. Multiple segments of the Euphrates are shrinking faster than regional models anticipated. What was once a continuous flow is now a chain of isolated pools separated by cracked mud corridors. The surface drops reveal patterns that look less like natural retreat and more like controlled exposure. This is the first layer of the event, visible recession aligned with structural change. Revelation sets this zone in its timeline. The great river was dried up, Revelation 16. That verse does not predict climate. It marks a point in a sequence. Current conditions resemble the opening act of that sequence. Field reports from the riverbed describe fractures running in clean, segmented lines. Pools form in repetitive spacing. Mud surfaces rise in circular mounds before collapsing. Gas releases appear in short, timed bursts rather than constant seepage. Steam rises in controlled columns. These movements suggest pressure from below, not the usual stress of surface evaporation. Monitoring teams note intermittent rumbling with no corresponding lateral slip. Microquake signatures show vertical force pushing upward. When vertical pressure and surface retreat appear at the same time, containment becomes a relevant category. Revelation 9 references 4 angels. bound at the great river Euphrates. The focus is restraint and appointment. A shift in restraint can manifest as pressure before exposure. As the waterline recedes, the second layer emerges. Openings appear where sediment once covered every contour. The shapes are not random voids. Reports mention rectangular entrances with parallel cut lines, corners that meet at clean angles, and stone faces smoothed beyond what flowing water would produce. Some structures show stacked stone fitted so tightly that a thin tool cannot slide between the seams. The transcript calls them engineered. Even if that claim needs independent confirmation, the geometry itself requires explanation. Whenever Scripture marks a boundary, architectural markers often appear. Genesis references rivers to define domains. Revelation returns to those same boundaries at the close. The symmetry matters. Inside several openings, observers report abrupt temperature drops. The air shifts from dry heat to cold stillness within a few steps. Sealed chambers show polished walls and joints that appear pressure-sealed. On these walls, warnings appear in multiple scripts, early cuneiform, later Aramaic lines, and fragments resembling Greek phonetics. The repeated phrase reads, "Do not open, do not release." The language pattern echoes the theme of restraint. It aligns with the biblical portrayal of appointed release, rather than human action directing events. Any political interest in the area remains secondary. Prophecy sets the frame. Nations move inside it, not above it. A threshold chamber contains an embedded object described as a blade-like barrier. It stands upright, fused into the stone, its edges sunk deep as if driven with force. No markings indicate ritual use or conflict. Its function appears simple: divide, halt, or seal. Scripture uses the image of a guarding sword in Genesis to mark restricted zones. The parallel is not exact, but the motif is familiar enough to note. Such an object signals boundary enforcement, not ornamentation. Below this threshold, a deeper chamber contains a sealed pit. The cover is circular, heavy, and marked with concentric patterns that show wear inconsistent with age alone. Several gouges appear along its edges. The scratches look recent, though their origin is not documented. Sensors detect low-frequency pulses, suggesting internal movement. Audio devices pick up intermittent tones, resembling metallic scraping and distant vibration. Dark vapor seeps from narrow cracks around the seal at irregular intervals. The transcript emphasizes that no team has lifted the cover. The data points remain incomplete, yet the signals point toward something restrained, not abandoned. Additional claims surface in later reports. Oversized skeletal remains embedded in collapsed sections, a sealed jar containing inscribed symbols and metallic fragments, and sightings labeled sky signs near the excavation zones. These signs include sudden light patterns, flock movements forming tight geometric shapes, and brief trumpet-like sounds with no recorded source. None of these elements stand alone as definitive evidence. Their significance lies in the pattern. Land opens, pressure rises, warnings appear, restraint imagery surfaces, and aerial signals coincide with ground exposure. This cluster forms a coherent event arc. It matches a scriptural sequence more than a random geological cycle. The activity points to timing, movement, and alignment. Something is unfolding beneath a river most of the world has stopped noticing. Pattern behind the event. The first pattern is exposure. Water withdraws in measurable stages. The ground follows with instability that rises in short, repeatable cycles. As the surface lowers, access points appear in places that held no visible structure months earlier. The sequence is consistent: retreat, rupture, opening, interior reach. Nothing in this order feels random. It follows a controlled reveal. Revelation states, "Prepared for the hour." Revelation 9. Preparation implies stages. The second pattern is pressure. Vertical tremors show upward force, not horizontal drift. Mud vents release in timed intervals. Gas escapes in brief pulses. The repetition suggests a build-up-release rhythm, not decay. When systems push from below while surfaces fall from above, the question is not erosion. It is internal change. These signals match the kind of activity expected when a sealed space begins to shift, not when it breaks without direction. The third pattern is containment. Every described chamber carries language of warning. Do not open, do not release. The phrasing repeats across scripts from different eras. The architecture supports the same message. Narrow bottlenecks, thick sealed walls, tunnels blocked by deliberate collapses, thresholds marked by embedded barriers. The transcript notes a layout built to restrain movement, not welcome it. Revelation references beings bound. Revelation 9. The text treats binding as an active category, not symbolic. The physical structures described echo that category. Again, alignment matters more than interpretation. The fourth pattern is multi-era convergence. Scripts from distant periods appear in one confined system. Cuneiform, Aramaic, Greek-like phonetics, symbols that resemble later regional motifs. The convergence suggests long-term maintenance, not a single-period construction. It resembles a cross-century warning system, different cultures repeating the same restriction to ensure message continuity. This is not typical archaeological layering. It looks curated. Scripture often shows God marking locations through generations for appointed times. The Euphrates corridor fits that rhythm. The fifth pattern is signal layering. Ground anomalies occur alongside reported atmospheric anomalies. Microquakes pair with unusual lights. Gas vents coincide with bird formations, tightening into geometric movements. Steam releases precede trumpet-like tones, recorded with no visible source. These signals differ in nature, yet rise together around the same windows of time. Layered signals often indicate coordinated movement across domains, land, air, and subsurface aligning under one sequence. Prophetic timelines use multiple signs to indicate transition points. The pattern here reflects that kind of convergence. The final pattern is narrative structure. The transcript arranges every element toward one template: restraint weakening, then controlled release conditions. Waterfalls, pressure increases, warnings surface, barriers appear, deeper systems shift, and atmospheric signs follow. Whether the transcript intended it or not, the flow mirrors Revelation's framework. Limits loosen, access widens, appointed release nears. The shape of the narrative is not sensational. It is procedural. The world may view these movements as environmental decline or isolated anomalies. The scriptural frame treats them as steps. Politics does not set this order. Prophecy sets the boundaries in which nations operate. That is why any geopolitical reaction to the Euphrates cannot redefine the sequence. At best, it responds to it. The primary motion is already underway beneath the surface. Taken together, these patterns form a coherent structure. Exposure, pressure, containment, convergence, layered signaling, and narrative alignment. Each part reinforces the others. No single anomaly defines the moment, but the collective movement signals a coordinated shift. Something is progressing through stages, while global attention remains elsewhere. The patterns show timing, order, and intention. And they point back to a text that has kept the Euphrates in its sequence from the first book to the last. There is motion in this corridor, and most of the world has not recognized its structure. Relevant prophetic frame. The central scriptural marker tied to this corridor is direct. The water of the great river Euphrates was dried up to prepare the way. Revelation 16. The verse stands in the middle of a timed sequence. It does not describe a disaster. It identifies a transition point. The drying is functional. It clears access for what comes next. When the river now recedes in accelerated stages, it cannot be taken as proof of fulfillment, but it does echo the order that Revelation sets. The second anchor is earlier in the book. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Revelation 9. The next line specifies the timing, prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year. The structure is exact. Appointment precedes release. Restraint precedes movement. Nothing in the text suggests human initiative drives the moment. The release is commanded from above, not triggered by events on the ground. These 2 scriptures form a frame. Drying prepares. Binding holds. Release follows at its appointed point. When viewed against that frame, the reported conditions along the river gain context. The water's retreat mirrors the preparatory stage. The containment signals, warnings, sealed chambers, barrier structures mirror the restraint phase. The ground activity and pressure shifts resemble the early signs of a system nearing transition. The transcript's narrative arranges these elements in the same direction the text outlines: preparation, exposure, weakening of restraint. Political developments around the region cannot redefine that order. Nations operate inside a prophetic timeline they do not control. Strategy may respond to conditions, but it does not set the clock. This is why the biblical frame must be kept intact and not expanded into speculation. The text gives sequence, not commentary. Genesis marks the Euphrates early. Revelation closes with it. The line between those bookends carries significance because Scripture keeps returning to it. The relevance of this frame is not in predicting outcomes. It is in recognizing alignment. A river that dries at speed. A ground system that behaves as if internal pressure is rising. Structures that speak the language of restraint. Multi-era warnings that repeat the same prohibition. Signals above and below the surface moving together. None of these confirm fulfillment. They indicate motion. The biblical lens keeps the focus steady. An appointed moment exists. Conditions move toward it. And the world watches the region through political categories while the deeper sequence continues largely unnoticed. Convergence with the current context. The Euphrates corridor now sits in a zone where climate stress, aging infrastructure, and regional strain overlap. These forces expose the riverbed faster than earlier projections suggested. They shape the environment, but they do not explain why this specific corridor appears in Scripture as a timing marker. The observable drivers are real. The scriptural placement is fixed. The convergence is what matters. The prophetic question is straightforward. Not whether political dynamics cause prophecy, but whether prophecy establishes the terrain where political and environmental forces intensify at the same point in time. Revelation names the Euphrates directly. When the same region enters simultaneous pressure from drought, power demand, population shifts, and security tension, the alignment becomes relevant. These pressures act as accelerators. They move the ground toward exposure. They do not originate the sequence. Revelation frames the sequence long before the rise of modern states. Israel remains central in end-time structures, not because of contemporary strategy, but because the biblical narrative consistently locates covenant, conflict, and final alignment around Jerusalem. That position does not diminish the Euphrates, it links the two. Scripture records geographic anchors that form a final stage corridor. Israel marks the spiritual center. The Euphrates marks a boundary tied to release conditions. These domains sit in one regional arc. When the arc becomes unstable, timing becomes a legitimate category to monitor. Global conditions amplify this convergence. Conflict cycles widen. Economic strain destabilizes planning horizons. Migration increases across regions under stress. Social volatility rises as institutions face pressure. None of these create the prophetic frame. They accelerate the alignment of systems already named in the text. When structures weaken and regions shift at the same time, movement becomes more visible along corridors already designated in Scripture. In the transcript, additional sign reports appear. Lights over excavation zones, trumpet-like tones, flock movements forming tight patterns. The explanations for these events vary. Some may be atmospheric, some may be acoustic distortions. The significance in the narrative is escalation. Local anomalies shift into broader expectation. Attention moves from isolated incidents to a sense that multiple domains, ground, air, and social perception, are entering one progression. The Bible often places signs in layered form before transition points. There will be signs in the heavens. Luke 21. The text speaks of signals, not sensationalism. As the Euphrates continues to recede, the surrounding context intensifies. Climate-driven exposure reveals structures. Regional tension increases monitoring. Economic pressure shifts resource priorities. These conditions direct global attention toward the corridor, even unconsciously. Yet the deeper motion is older than the pressures acting on it. Scripture set the coordinates long before current systems took form. This convergence does not confirm fulfillment. It clarifies pattern. The sequence now visible: drying, instability, exposure, warnings, pressure, regional strain, matches the shape of the frame Revelation gives. The world interprets the region through political risk and environmental metrics. The prophetic lens sees order taking form beneath both. Something is moving within a structure defined long ago, and much of the world remains unaware of the alignment gathering around it. The Euphrates has now reached a threshold where structures long covered by water stand in open view. This changes the field entirely. What was theoretical becomes observable. What was sealed beneath silt becomes accessible for measurement, imaging, and documentation. The shift is practical. Exposure enables verification. Revelation names the river as a marker, and markers gain weight when they move from obscured to visible. Technology intensifies this visibility. Satellite feeds show recession lines in near real time. Phones capture vents, tremors, and openings from multiple angles. Sensors record pressure changes that earlier generations could not detect. Distribution is immediate. An event that once would have stayed local becomes global data within hours. This is not embellishment. It is a new informational environment. When Scripture ties a location to a timed sequence, and modern tools make every change at that location transparent, timing becomes a central factor. The transcript operates on a clear internal logic. Sequence activation. The claim is not that prophecy is fulfilled. The claim is that once the river dries past a certain point, imagery of restraint, warnings, chambers, blocked thresholds enters reach. The movement shifts from text to terrain. Revelation 16 identifies a preparatory moment. Revelation 9 presents restrained beings positioned at the same river. When conditions on the ground allow the restrained zone to be approached, the narrative frame moves from abstract to spatial. The broader model in the transcript is convergence. Earth movement aligns with exposure. Atmospheric reports rise alongside seismic anomalies. Global disorder increases while a named prophetic corridor undergoes structural change. None of these categories define the whole picture alone. Their overlap is what gives the moment weight. Convergence reduces ambiguity. It ties independent signals into one window of time. Timing in this context is not dramatic. It is diagnostic. A transition occurs when background conditions become observable markers that match the geography named in Scripture. Drying, pressure, exposure, and layered signs all fall within that category. They indicate motion toward a stage the text sets, but does not rush. The world interprets these shifts as environmental or geopolitical noise. The prophetic lens treats them as the early indicators of an appointed progression taking shape while most remain unaware. The Euphrates is drying at speed. Ground behavior around the exposed zones shows patterns that do not match normal decline. Subterranean structures with engineered features now sit in open air. The layout resembles containment, not habitation. These elements line up with the sequence assigned to the Euphrates in Revelation, where drying precedes access and access precedes an appointed release. Prepared for the hour, Revelation 9, remains the scriptural anchor. The significance is not in dramatic claims. It is in the pattern: exposure increasing, pressure rising from below, sealing language repeating across chambers, and a biblical framework that treats this corridor as a timed geographic marker. None of this determines outcomes. It establishes a direction worth monitoring. In the current global climate, where regional tension, resource strain, and spiritual volatility converge over territories named in Scripture, the information functions as a marker narrative. It points to movement rather than conclusion. The responsible approach is disciplined observation. Verify what is visible, distinguish fact from assumption, and track whether the sequence continues along the same trajectory. Something is shifting in a corridor the world rarely considers, yet Scripture placed it in the final sequence long before these conditions appeared.